Morgan Coleman stood at the window of his office on Central Avenue, watching the autumn wind blow leaves across the deserted streets of Great Falls. At 38, he looked older than his age, gray hair at his temples, deep wrinkles around his eyes from years of working outdoors. His construction firm, Coleman Associates, occupied a modest space in an old brick building, half of which was filled with blueprints, material samples, and the smell of fresh coffee. The ringing of the phone interrupted his thoughts. His sister's name lit up on the display. "Hi, Melissa," he said, already sensing that the conversation would not be easy. "Morgan, I need to talk to you, urgently." Melissa's voice sounded tense. At 35, she had always been the more emotional of the two, but today there was a note of panic in her tone. "What about?" "Not over the phone. Can you come over to my house? I canceled all my client meetings." An hour later, Morgan was sitting in his sister's living room in Malmstrom, an affluent neighborhood. Melissa's house, a two-story cottage with a perfectly manicured lawn, always gave him mixed feelings. On the one hand, he was proud of his sister's success in real estate, but on the other, he felt that an invisible wall was growing between them. "What's wrong?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee. Melissa sat down opposite him, nervously smoothing her blonde hair. She always took care of her appearance. Even at home, she wore a business suit, and her makeup was flawless. "I heard you're seeing someone." Rick mentioned it yesterday at the store. Morgan raised an eyebrow. "And?" "Morgan, we're family. We only have each other after our parents died. I have a right to know what's going on in your life." "Her name is Samantha," he said slowly. "Samantha Riley. We met a month ago." "A month?" Melissa almost spilled her coffee. "And you didn't tell me?" "Because I knew this would be your reaction." Morgan leaned back on the sofa. "I'm 38, Melissa. I have the right to date whoever I want. Tell me about her." Morgan paused, gathering his thoughts. "She's special. She's had a difficult life, health problems, work problems, but she's a strong woman." "Where did you meet?" "Online." "In a support group." Melissa frowned. "What support group?" "You don't have any problems that require—" "Everyone has problems, Melissa." His voice grew colder. "Not all of us can afford the perfect life." An awkward pause hung in the air. Morgan knew he had hurt his sister, but he couldn't stop now. Years of pent-up irritation at her attempts to control his life were coming to a head. "Morgan, I'm worried about you." "You were depressed for 3 years after Jennifer. I don't want you to be taken advantage of again." "Samantha isn't Jennifer," he said sharply. "And I've made a decision." "What decision?" "We're getting married." Next week, Melissa turned pale. The coffee cup trembled in her hands. "What?" "You heard me. The ceremony will be on Thursday at City Hall. Nothing fancy." "Morgan, you can't be serious. A month of dating is nothing. You haven't even introduced her to me." "Why should I?" "So you could find fault with her?" Morgan stood up and headed for the door. "I came to tell you the news out of courtesy, not to ask for your permission." "Wait!" Melissa grabbed his arm. "You said she has health problems. What kind?" Morgan hesitated. "She's overweight." "How overweight?" "None of your business." "Morgan!" "About 450 pounds, he said through clenched teeth. Melissa sank to the sofa as if she had been struck. "My God. I'm leaving." "The ceremony is Thursday at 2 p.m. at City Hall. You can come or not. It's your choice." Morgan slammed the door, leaving his sister in shock. That evening, he met Rick Jenkins at Charlie's Bar, their traditional Friday night hangout for the past 20 years. Rick, a stocky man with a thick beard, was his business partner and his only truly close friend. "Melissa called me an hour and a half ago," Rick said, without even saying hello. "She says you've completely lost your mind." "Good to see you too, Rick." "Seriously, Morgan, what's going on?" A month ago, you didn't even mention dating, and now you're suddenly getting married? Morgan took a sip of beer. I met someone I want to spend the rest of my life with. Isn't that natural? In a month? Rick shook his head. Dude, we've known each other since we were 10. You've never made impulsive decisions. You even took 6 months to choose an apartment. Maybe I've changed. Or this woman is influencing you somehow. Rick leaned closer. Melissa said she has serious weight issues. Is that true? Morgan felt himself boiling inside. Yes, it's true. So what? Nothing. Just, are you sure she's not using you? Financially, I mean. Samantha isn't like that. How do you know? A month is nothing, Morgan. I know because I've spent time with her. Real time. We've talked about life, dreams, fears. She understands me like no one ever has. Rick sighed. Okay, if you're really happy, but promise me you'll think about it again. Give yourself at least a month to think it over. It's too late. The ceremony is on Thursday. Damn. Rick rubbed his face with his hands. All right, I'll be there. Someone has to be your witness in this madness. Thursday dawned gray and rainy. Only 5 people gathered at the Great Falls City Hall. Morgan, Samantha, the official conducting the ceremony, Rick as a witness, and, to Morgan's surprise, Melissa. Samantha arrived in a wheelchair, wearing a simple blue dress that nevertheless couldn't hide her size. Her face was beautiful, large brown eyes, soft features, but it was almost lost in the mass of her body. She smiled nervously, occasionally adjusting her hair. Hi, she said quietly to Melissa. You must be Morgan's sister. Melissa nodded, smiling tensely. Yes, nice to finally meet you. The ceremony lasted only 10 minutes. The standard vows, exchange of rings, kiss. Morgan felt strange, as if he were watching the proceedings from the outside. But when he looked into Samantha's eyes, all his doubts disappeared. In her gaze, he saw gratitude, love, and hope. After the ceremony, they went to Morgan's house, a modest 1-story cottage in the old part of town. Rick and Melissa left almost immediately after a short toast. It all happened so fast, Samantha said quietly, standing in the living room of her new home. Do you regret it? Morgan asked. She shook her head. No. I just can't believe that someone wanted to be with me. A real marriage, not out of pity. Morgan took her hand. I didn't marry you out of pity, Samantha. I married you because you made me feel alive again. But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that he had done something irreversible. Something that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him in ways he couldn't yet foresee. The first night of marriage passed surprisingly calmly. Samantha fell asleep in the recliner in the living room, the only place where she could get comfortable. Morgan brought her extra pillows and a blanket, then went to bed in his own bedroom, thinking about what had happened. The house felt different with another person there. The sound of her breathing from the living room, the faint scent of her perfume mixed with medication. In the morning, he woke up to the sound of the TV. Samantha was watching the morning news, sipping coffee from a large mug. Several bottles of medicine and a glucometer lay on the coffee table. Good morning, Mrs. Coleman, Morgan said. And Samantha smiled, for the first time in a long time, sincerely and without a hint of embarrassment. They ate breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Morgan studied his new wife, trying to comprehend the magnitude of the changes in his life. Samantha moved slowly but confidently, clearly accustomed to the limitations of her body. She was an intelligent woman, that much was clear from their online correspondence, but now she seemed weighed down by the circumstances. Their story began 6 weeks ago in a support group called Life After Loss on a popular forum. Morgan had joined after a particularly difficult day, when the anniversary of his parents' death had hit him with double the force. He was 17 when a car accident took the lives of his mother and father, leaving him and 15-year-old Melissa completely orphaned. Aunt Dorothy took them in, but the house in Billings never felt like home. In the group, he wrote about how difficult it was to build relationships when he had lost his parents at such a young age, about how the fear of another loss made him keep people at a distance. Samantha responded to his post with a long message about her own loneliness. She talked about the years of isolation she experienced after gaining weight due to a hormonal disorder and depression. She talked about how she lost her job as an administrator at a dental clinic when her condition deteriorated to the point where she could no longer move around normally. Their correspondence lasted for weeks, first in a group chat, then in private messages, then on the phone. Samantha turned out to be a well-read, witty woman with a deep understanding of human nature. She didn't try to pretend to be someone else. She spoke openly about her health problems, her type 2 diabetes, and the fact that she lived on disability benefits in a tiny apartment in Helena. Morgan told her about his business, about how difficult it was to be the sole support for his sister, who had always been more ambitious and successful, about his relationship with Jennifer Marsh, which lasted 4 years and ended when she found someone with great prospects, a bank manager from Missoula. He told her how he had shut himself off from the world after that, focusing only on his work. Their first meeting took place at Maggie's Cafe in downtown Helena. Morgan drove there for 2 hours, feeling more nervous than he had ever felt in his life. When he saw Samantha, he was shocked. The photos did not convey the true extent of her condition. But when she spoke, he forgot everything else. Her voice was exactly as he had imagined it, and her smile was warm and a little sad at the same time. They talked for 5 hours. Samantha told him about her childhood in Billings with an alcoholic mother and an absent father. She shared how food became her only source of comfort after a traumatic experience at 14. She talked about years of therapy that only helped partially, and how her weight became both a protection from the world and a prison. Morgan didn't feel pity. He felt recognition. There was something in her story that resonated with his own pain. They were both people who had been broken by life at a young age and who had learned to survive, but not to truly live. Now, watching her in his living room, Morgan tried to understand what had made him propose after only 3 dates. Perhaps it was her reaction when he told her about the firm's financial problems. Instead of sympathy or advice, she simply took his hand and said, "We'll get through this." Not "you'll get through this," but "we." The phone rang around noon. "Melissa." "How are you?" his sister asked, trying to sound neutral. "Fine. We're getting used to it." "Morgan, I want to apologize for my reaction yesterday. Maybe I was too harsh." He heard something else in her voice but couldn't quite place it. "You were worried." "That's understandable. Can I come visit you tomorrow? I'd like to get to know Samantha better." After talking to his sister, Rick called. His voice sounded worried. "Listen, I didn't want to upset you, but I have news about the contract with the municipality. They want to revise the terms." Morgan felt a chill run down his spine. The municipal contract to renovate the school gym was their biggest project this year. Without it, the firm could find itself in serious financial trouble. What kind of revision? They want to cut the budget by 30%. They say they've found cheaper contractors from Billings. Morgan closed his eyes. He hadn't told Samantha how serious their financial problems were. The firm owed its suppliers nearly $40,000, and the bank had already called twice about overdue payments on the equipment loan. "We'll discuss it tomorrow at the office," he said, and hung up. Samantha didn't ask about the content of the conversation, but Morgan could see that she was watching him. There was understanding in her eyes. She knew he had problems and was patiently waiting for him to decide to share them. In the evening, they sat in the living room watching an old movie on cable TV. Samantha checked her blood sugar and gave herself an insulin injection with her usual ease. Morgan watched the procedure with curiosity. Diabetes was new territory for him. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She smiled. "You get used to it. I've been doing this for 10 years. Tell me about your family. Your real family, not just the bad stuff." Samantha thought for a moment. I had a maternal grandmother, Alice. She died when I was 23. She was the only person who truly loved me. Her voice softened. She baked incredible pies, and she always said that the most important thing in life was to find someone who would love you, not in spite of your flaws, but with them. Morgan took her hand. A wise woman. Yes. It's a shame she didn't live to see our wedding. She would have liked you. They went to bed late. Samantha settled back into her chair, and Morgan lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel lonely. But along with that feeling came another, an uneasy premonition that their fragile happiness was under threat. Financial problems, family pressure, his own doubts, all of this created a sense of an approaching storm. Behind the wall, the clock ticked, counting down the first hours of their life together. Morgan didn't know that in 24 hours he would be gone, and Samantha would find herself at the center of a murder investigation that would rock the quiet town of Great Falls to its foundations. Saturday began with an unexpected visit. At 8 in the morning, the doorbell rang, and Morgan opened it to find Melissa on the doorstep with a large bag of groceries and a forced smile. "I thought you might need some fresh food," she said, not waiting to be invited in. "And I want to make breakfast for you too." Samantha sat in her chair, watching Melissa survey the house with a critical eye. Her sister's real estate instincts were obvious. She was assessing the space, mentally calculating square footage and the condition of the property. "Some things need to be changed here," Melissa said, unloading the bags in the kitchen. "The doorways are too narrow, there are no handrails in the bathroom. And that threshold in the bedroom." Morgan felt irritated. Melissa talked about Samantha as if she weren't there, discussing the necessary modifications to the house for a person with disabilities. While cooking eggs, Melissa continued to survey the rooms appraisingly. Morgan's house was modest: 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room combined with a kitchen. He had bought it 15 years ago when his business was just starting to turn a profit. At the time, it seemed like a temporary home, but the years passed, and his plans for a bigger house remained just that: plans. "How much is it worth now?" Melissa asked, as if in passing. "About $180,000, I guess." "Why?" Melissa shrugged, but Morgan noticed her quickly calculating something in her head. Her professional skills prevented her from simply enjoying a family breakfast. She was constantly analyzing real estate, calculating its potential and value. After breakfast, Samantha went to rest in her bedroom, leaving her brother and sister alone. "Morgan, we need to talk," Melissa said when they were alone in the living room. "About what?" "About money. About your business. About how you're going to support a wife with such medical needs." Morgan felt the muscles in the back of his neck tense. "My finances are none of your concern." "Of course they are. You're the only family I have." Melissa moved closer, lowering her voice. "Rick says the firm is in trouble, that you might lose the municipal contract. Rick talks too much. He's worried. So am I." There was a note of desperation in her voice. "Morgan, after our parents died, we promised each other we'd always be honest. How bad is it?" Morgan was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the gray autumn sky of Great Falls. For 20 years, he had been used to being strong for Melissa, but now the burden of responsibility seemed unbearable. "We owe about $40,000 to suppliers. The bank is demanding repayment of the equipment loan, another $25,000. If we lose the municipal contract, we'll have to close the company." Melissa turned pale. "Oh my God. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you have enough to worry about with your own problems." "What problems?" "I'm fine." Morgan looked at her closely. In recent months, Melissa had seemed tense, often canceling their traditional family dinners, citing work. Her house in the Maelstrom area was worth at least $400,000, and the real estate market in Great Falls was not doing well. "How's your mortgage?" he asked. Melissa looked away. "I'm managing." "Melissa, okay, there are some difficulties, but it's temporary. I have a few big deals coming up." They sat in silence, each lost in their own financial nightmares. Morgan now understood why his sister had reacted so painfully to his marriage. The house was the only major asset in their family. After his death, she, as his closest relative, could claim it. And now, there was a wife. "Have you made a will?" Melissa asked. "Not yet. But I plan to, and what will be in it?" Morgan felt awkward about the directness of the question, but he understood his sister's concern. "Half the house to Samantha, half to you. The business to Rick, if there's anything left." Melissa nodded, but something flashed in her eyes that made Morgan wary. Around noon, Rick arrived. He looked even more troubled than the day before and asked Morgan to come out to the garage to talk in private. "I got another call from the suppliers," Rick said, closing the garage door. "They want payment by Monday, or they'll take us to court." Morgan sat down on a toolbox. The garage was filled with the company's equipment, expensive tools they had bought on credit in better times. Now it all seemed like a mockery of their ambitions. "What if we sell the equipment? We'll get half of what we owe at most. And without the tools, we won't be able to work." "Then what do you suggest?" Rick paused, clearly choosing his words. "Morgan, I don't want to sound insensitive, but your wedding came at a very bad time." "What do you mean?" "You now have to support a wife with serious health problems. Her medical expenses will be enormous, and we're already in crisis." Morgan felt a surge of anger. "Are you suggesting I abandon my wife 2 days after our wedding?" "I'm suggesting you think realistically. Samantha lived 29 years without you. She'll survive without you. But we could lose the firm for good. The firm is a business, Rick. Samantha is my life." Rick sighed. "Fine. But then we need to find the money somewhere else. Fast." That evening, after Melissa and Rick left, a heavy atmosphere hung over the house. Samantha ate her dinner in silence, glancing at her husband from time to time. Morgan knew she had overheard snippets of their conversation and guessed at the scale of the problems. "We can cancel the health insurance," she said quietly when they were alone. "What? My health insurance? If things are that bad, I can get by with government insurance." Morgan shook his head. "No way. Your health is more important than money. But if you lose your business because of me, I could lose my business without you, but I couldn't find you again." Samantha began to cry, not sobbing, but quietly, tears simply streaming down her face. "I don't want to be a burden, Morgan. My whole life consists of being a burden to people. You're not a burden." He took her hands. "You're my wife. We'll get through this. Somehow we'll get through this." But late at night, lying in bed and listening to Samantha tossing and turning in her chair in the living room, Morgan felt the walls closing in on him. Financial problems, pressure from family and friends, responsibility for a wife with serious health problems, it all created a feeling of being trapped with no way out. He thought about the $300,000 insurance policy he had taken out 5 years ago when the business was thriving. At the time, it had seemed like a sensible decision, to provide for Melissa in case something happened to him. Now that sum could solve all their problems. The thought was so inappropriate that Morgan tried to push it away, but it kept coming back. Outside the window, the autumn wind howled, heralding the approach of winter. Morgan didn't know that this was his last night on Earth, and that in a few hours, someone close to him would make a decision that would change everyone else's lives forever. Sunday morning, October 27th, began as usual. Samantha woke up around 7, checked her blood sugar as usual, and took her morning insulin injection. Morgan was still asleep in the bedroom. After yesterday's conversation about money, he had trouble falling asleep. At 9 in the morning, she tried to wake him up. The bedroom door was locked, which seemed strange. Morgan never locked himself in his own house. Samantha knocked and called out, but there was no answer. Her anxiety grew. Moving on crutches to the living room, she saw something that made her heart stop. Morgan was lying on the floor near the sofa, bent unnaturally, face down. His body was motionless, his arms stretched toward the phone on the coffee table. Samantha screamed. The sound of her voice echoed through the empty house, but Morgan didn't move. She tried to get closer, but her crutches prevented her from moving quickly. With trembling hands, she dialed 911. The first responders to arrive were the Great Falls Emergency Response paramedics. Jake Miller and his partner Tony Richards had been working together for 8 years and had seen a lot, but the scene at the Park Avenue house made them sit up and take notice. Morgan Coleman, a local contractor, was lying in the living room wearing only a t-shirt and boxer shorts. His posture was not consistent with a natural fall or a heart attack. Jake checked his pulse, although it was clear from the appearance of the body that the man had been dead for several hours. The absence of rigor mortis indicated that death had occurred recently, possibly between midnight and 4 in the morning. There were no visible wounds or traces of blood on the body, but the arrangement of the furniture and the slight mess on the coffee table hinted at a possible struggle. Tony called the police on his radio while Jake tried to calm Samantha, who was sitting in a wheelchair in the corner of the room, sobbing. Her diabetic supplies were scattered on the floor next to the chair: insulin vials, a glucometer, disposable syringes. 20 minutes later, Detective Carla Mann from the County Police Homicide Division arrived. At 44, she was one of the most experienced investigators in western Montana. The coincidence of her last name with that of the victim was accidental, but it added an extra emotional layer to the investigation. Detective Mann immediately noticed several strange details. The bedroom door was indeed locked from the inside, but the key was lying on the living room floor next to the body. The windows in the house were closed and locked. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, and the lock was intact. This meant that the killer either had a key or was let in by the victim herself. While examining the crime scene, the detective noticed an overturned coffee cup on the coffee table. The coffee had not yet dried completely, which confirmed the time frame of death. Pills were scattered on the floor, aspirin from Morgan's home medicine cabinet. A cell phone with a cracked screen lay next to the body. Samantha gave her initial statement, barely holding back tears. She said she had gone to bed around 11 p.m. in the living room, as usual. She woke up twice during the night to check her blood sugar, around 2 and around 5 in the morning. The second time, she heard noises coming from the bedroom, but thought her husband was just tossing and turning in his sleep. In the morning, she found the bedroom door locked and was unable to wake Monday. When she entered the living room, she saw his body on the floor. She did not touch him and immediately called an ambulance. The testimony seemed logical, but Detective Mann noticed some inconsistencies. Samantha claimed that she had spent the whole night in an armchair in the living room, but there were no traces of her presence there. The armchair looked unused, and the cushions were neatly arranged. It was also strange that a woman of such weight and limited mobility was able to get to the phone so quickly and call for help. Melissa arrived an hour after the police were called. Her reaction to the news of her brother's death seemed suspiciously restrained to the detective. Instead of the hysteria or shock that close relatives usually display, she was businesslike, immediately asking questions about the will and insurance. There were also contradictions in her testimony. Melissa claimed that she was home alone on Saturday night, watching TV until late. But when the detective asked her about specific programs, she couldn't remember any. Moreover, neighbors saw her car leaving the house around 10:30 p.m. Rick Jenkins arrived upset and confused. His grief seemed genuine. He and Morgan had been friends for 28 years. But his account of their Friday conversation at the bar contained details that did not match the testimony of other witnesses. He claimed that Morgan was optimistic about his financial problems, even though he had seemed depressed and anxious the day before. An examination of the body revealed several bruises on Morgan's arms and chest, consistent with a struggle. There were abrasions on the knuckles of his right hand, as if he had struck someone. Pieces of skin were found under his fingernails and sent for DNA analysis. The most intriguing discovery was a vial of insulin found under the sofa. It was almost empty, although Samantha claimed she had opened a new vial the night before. The vial had fingerprints from several people, including Samantha, but analysis revealed additional, as yet unidentified fingerprints. The medical examiner's preliminary conclusion pointed to insulin poisoning as a possible cause of death. A large dose of insulin could cause a sharp drop in blood sugar, leading to coma and death within a few hours. In a healthy person without diabetes, such an injection would be fatal. Detective Mon realized she was dealing with a carefully planned murder disguised as an accident or natural death. The killer knew about Samantha's diabetes and had access to her medication. This narrowed the circle of suspects to those who were close to the family and had the opportunity to enter the house. By Sunday evening, the detective had compiled a preliminary list of suspects. Samantha had obvious access to insulin and was the only witness to the events of that night, but her physical limitations made it unlikely that she could have overpowered a grown man in a struggle. Melissa knew about her brother's financial problems and could have benefited from his death, but she would have to explain how she got into the house. Rick had a key to the house as a business partner, but his motive was less obvious. The investigation was just beginning, but it was already clear that Morgan Coleman's death was no accident. Someone close to him had decided to kill him using the most insidious of methods, a drug intended to save lives. Monday brought the first results of the examinations. The forensic medical examination confirmed insulin poisoning as the cause of Morgan Coleman's death. The insulin level in his blood was 15 times higher than normal, which for a person without diabetes meant certain death. The time of death was determined to be between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. on Sunday. Detective Mon delved into a financial investigation that revealed a picture of despair and greed. Bank records showed that the construction firm Coleman Associates was on the verge of bankruptcy. They owed suppliers $42,000 and had an overdue equipment loan of $27,000. Their municipal contract, their last hope, had been officially canceled on Friday, the day before the murder. But the most important discovery was Morgan's life insurance policy with Mutual Life of Montana for $300,000. The policy had been taken out 5 years ago, when the business was thriving. Melissa Coleman was named as the beneficiary, as she was the only close relative. The documents had not been changed after Morgan's marriage. Melissa's financial situation turned out to be even more critical than her brother's. Her house in the Maelstrom area was mortgaged for $420,000, with a market value of $350,000. The real estate market in Great Falls was in decline, and several of Melissa's major deals had fallen through in recent months. Bank records showed $18,000 in overdue mortgage payments. The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings on the house. Phone records revealed another important detail. On Saturday evening, a few hours before the murder, Melissa received a call from the bank's lawyer, informing her that foreclosure proceedings would begin on Wednesday if the debt was not paid immediately. DNA testing of skin particles found under Morgan's fingernails yielded an unexpected result. The sample belonged to Melissa Coleman. This meant that a physical struggle had taken place between the brother and sister on the night of the murder. Fingerprints on the insulin vial also confirmed Melissa's presence in the house. In addition to Samantha's fingerprints, there were clear fingerprints of Melissa and smudged traces of medical gloves on the glass. On Tuesday, Detective Mon summoned Melissa for a second interrogation. The woman arrived accompanied by a lawyer, which in itself was suspicious for a close relative of the victim. When presented with the evidence, Melissa initially tried to refute it. She claimed that her fingerprints could have been left on the bottle during her Saturday visit when she was helping Samantha organize her medical supplies. The DNA under her brother's fingernails was explained away as accidental contact during a goodbye hug. But the detective had another ace up her sleeve. A surveillance camera at a gas station on the outskirts of Maelstrom recorded Melissa's car at midnight on Saturday, heading toward Morgan's house. The same camera captured her return at 2:40 a.m. on Sunday. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Melissa broke down. The tears she had been holding back since her brother's death finally burst forth. She confessed to the murder but tried to portray it as an impulsive act, the result of a family quarrel that got out of hand. According to her, she had come to Morgan's house late at night to talk again about his marriage and financial situation. Her brother met her in the living room. Samantha was asleep in the bedroom. Melissa told him about the call from the bank and begged her brother to help her with money. Morgan refused, saying that he was on the verge of bankruptcy himself and had to take care of his wife. The conversation turned into an argument. Melissa accused her brother of selfishness, of betraying his family for a woman he barely knew. Morgan replied that he was tired of her constant demands for money and attempts to control his life. He said that after the will was finalized, Samantha would get half of the house, and Melissa would have to find other ways to solve her financial problems. In a fit of desperation, Melissa grabbed an insulin syringe that was lying on the coffee table among Samantha's medical supplies. She hadn't planned to kill him, but at that moment, the $300,000 insurance payout seemed like her only salvation. Morgan tried to take the syringe from her, and a struggle ensued. In the end, she managed to inject him in the neck. Morgan fell and began to convulse. Melissa realized what she had done, but it was too late. She tried to revive her brother, giving him sugar, but the insulin worked quickly. Half an hour later, Morgan lost consciousness, and an hour later, he stopped breathing. Melissa spent over an hour staging an accident. She locked the bedroom door from the inside and threw the key into the living room to make it look like Morgan had left during the night. She scattered aspirin tablets to simulate an attempt at self-medication. She knocked over a cup of coffee to explain the noise Samantha might have heard. The most cynical thing was her decision not to wake Samantha. Melissa knew that a woman with such physical limitations would automatically become the prime suspect. She hoped that the police would conclude either an accident involving an insulin overdose or a murder committed by the wife. Melissa's arrest took place on Wednesday morning at her home. She did not resist, and even seemed relieved that the secret had been revealed. At the preliminary hearing, she was charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. Samantha was shocked by her mother-in-law's arrest. In 3 days, she had lost her husband and learned that her own medication had been used to kill him. She was haunted by guilt for not waking up and preventing the tragedy. She returned to Helena to see her social worker, renouncing all claims to Morgan's inheritance. Rick Jenkins took on the task of liquidating the construction company. The sale of equipment and tools allowed him to partially pay off the debts, but he lost his savings invested in the business. At the age of 42, he had to start his career over as a hired worker at a large construction company in Billings. Morgan's house was sold to cover the company's debts. The insurance company initially refused to pay the policy, but after a lengthy court case, the money was transferred to the Montana Crime Victims Fund. Melissa's trial lasted 4 months. Her lawyers tried to get the charge reduced to manslaughter, citing her emotional state and the lack of premeditation. But the prosecution proved that there was a motive of greed and an attempt to stage the crime. Melissa Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her final statement, she asked Samantha for forgiveness, but the woman was not present in the courtroom. The tragedy of the Coleman family shook the quiet town of Great Falls. Residents discussed how financial problems and family greed could turn loved ones into murderers. The story made local and regional media as an example of how modern economic difficulties are destroying traditional family values.